then you're not critically engaging with the last few years. So yes, we're better off because we got out of a crisis better than any other. Well, just listen, Dave. Just listen.
Dave Rubin's
we came out of a crisis.
All right, Luke, you don't want to put any blame onto your side. And that's fine.
Sure,
they've
put some
been in
blame
charge.
as long as we're
but your side have been in charge.
As long as we're considering the full context of it.
You can't keep blaming Trump for everything that happened.
Where's the blame?
YouTuber Luke Beasley went on Piers Morgan Show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, to engage in a debate with a panel made up of right-wingers Dave Rubin and Larry Elder, Democratic strategist Amisha Cross, and of course, Piers Morgan himself. In this first segment that we're going to take a look at here, the panel is discussing Kamala Harris saying that she worked at McDonald's and right-wingers not believing that. Let's take a look at this together.
Luke, do you not think it's strange that she's been so specific? She's named the branch that she worked at. She's named the summer that she worked there, 1983. And she said she was working on the ice cream stand, the French fry stand, on reception. She was there for weeks on end throughout one summer, and not a single human being that came across her, either working with her or a customer or anything, has
I haven't seen a person come out and say,
hang on, has any memory of this person who is now potentially about to become president of the United States. I'm just smelling a rat here. And it's not a very pleasant smelling rat.
Do you remember the names and the faces of people who have served you at McDonald's? I
can tell you, if I was running for British Prime Minister,
especially from 30 plus years ago.
Here's my response. If I was running for British Prime Minister right now, I can guarantee I did some terrible jobs in my time. I wish I'd been at McDonald's. It sounds a great gig, but I did some awful stuff. I shoveled mushroom manure one summer. All the people that did it with me would remember, and they would all pop up and they'd talk about it. I mean, Dave Rubin. It just stretches credulity that here we are. She's been saying this for several years now. Nobody can remember her ever being at McDonald's, Dave.
Well, sure, but why don't we do something a little more substantive, whether than she's lying or not about her resume? I mean, this is also a woman who's basically being installed as president as far as the Democrats are concerned, so they're not that concerned with resumes. What I'd rather talk about for a moment, since two of the guests mentioned minimum wage, is that the market should dictate what minimum wage is. If you want to artificially tell the McDonald's how much they have to pay people, so it should be $25 an hour, $30 an hour, whatever you want to decide it should be, well, congratulations, McDonald's will then bring in iPads, which they are doing at airports and they're doing at restaurants all over the country right now. And then nobody will have a job. So the market dictates that. That's not Donald Trump being mean. That's not him hating people from lower economic classes or anything else. But certain jobs, only the market dictates how much they're worth. So unless you want 15 iPads in every McDonald's and one guy who comes in once a month who will probably be paid $20 an hour to repair those iPads or get the grease off them, you're going to fire an awful lot of people by telling the government that it should tell stores how much they should pay their employees.
Guess what, Dave Rubin? McDonald's and other large corporations like this are going to replace workers with iPads and AI and whatever, regardless of what the pay is. It's not that if McDonald's was paying $5 an hour, they're not going to automate. They're going to do this anyway. And this is happening even in industries where the workers are paid a lot of money. I read a New York Times article a while back about the oil industry where they used to have a bunch of people who would be operating the oil rigs and all that. Well, now the oil rigs have legs on them to where they can, they're little robots basically, so they can move themselves, or they're controlled by a remote control somewhere. So what previously 20 or 30 people did, it's now just one person in an office somewhere operating this oil rig that moves around remotely. And those aren't minimum wage workers that were doing these jobs previously. So it's, Dave Rubin might get replaced by AI or an iPad or whatever piece of technology someday. So this really has nothing to do with what the salaries are and minimum wage. Corporations are going to replace everybody with as much automation as they possibly can so they don't have to pay anything to workers. So this is not a valid argument from Dave Rubin. But he's a moron.
Okay,
at least we're talking about substance now. I love this conversation. Let's talk about minimum wage.
Hang on.
Let's talk about how
Hang on. Please don't all talk until I ask you. It's just easier if I manage it. I want to switch gears to Kamala's appearance on Fox News. And Amisha, I'll start with you. Let's take a little look. This was SNL mocking that interview. Let's take a look.
Well, thank you, Madam Vice President. Now, when I interviewed President Trump, my first question was, what do you think is the most important issue facing our nation? So my first question for you is, give me the exact number of murderers you let loose in this country.
Brett, I'm glad you brought up the topic of immigration.
1 million, 2 million?
Okay. The first thing we did in office was to introduce a bill.
10 million? Give me a number.
Brett, we came up with a bipartisan
But
bill.
you didn't have a number, though.
May I please finish?
I'm asking you to.
Well, then you have to listen.
Well, I can't because I'm talking.
Now, Misha, aside from the strange spectacle of Alec Baldwin making his comeback, which I think feels a little too soon, perhaps, the nature of her going on Fox News, I thought it was quite a ballsy move to do it. I've got to be reasonable credit to her for going on there. It got a massive audience, the biggest audience of any interview in the whole presidential race. Do you think it, in the end, though, was a good or not so good move for her?
She came to do exactly what she did. I think that pointing out Donald Trump's instigations of wanting to eradicate certain news networks, calling out individuals who he wanted to issue prosecutions of, who have spoken out against him or who didn't support him. She went on to do what she needed to do. And I think that in terms of going on Fox, yes, it has a big audience, but she wasn't necessarily trying to draw in an audience that is largely Trump and MAGA supporters. People know what Fox News is, as much as she was going into the house that Donald Trump built in many ways, the same place that has been sued multi-million dollars over for lying about election fraud in the 2020 election, and she shook up their house. That's what she intended to do during this campaign, and then she walked off. And I think that she did a very strong job of it. It was not going to be a friendly space. She knew that going in. That just is what it is. This was the first time she'd sat down with Fox during this entire cycle. And I think that it made a difference because it showcased that she wasn't afraid to have the conversation, but also that she walked away, just rose like the phoenix, as strong as she was when she walked in.
All right, Larry, I certainly didn't think she
What's always funny on all of these, just an aside, on all of these Piers Morgan uncensored panels is just to watch the right-wingers smirk and shake their head and all of that while the Democrats or progressives are talking. And I mean, it happens the other way, too. When the Republicans and the MAGA right-wingers are talking, the people on the left do the same thing. But it's just always funny to me to watch their reactions.
Had a stunning success. I don't think he was an abject failure either, but CNN's Van Jones, who's obviously very pro-Kamala, said the problem with it was she's still in persuasion mode when she should be in turnout mode. I thought that was an interesting verdict on that.
Well, I agree with her. The point was for her to go on Fox News, stand up, show she wasn't afraid, show she had the stones to go to Fox News. The problem is much more fundamental. Are you better off now than you were 3.5, 4 years ago? The average family of four is spending $1,200 a month more for the same goods and services as that family spent 3.5, 4 years ago. We're paying 50% more for gas than we were 3.5, 4 years ago. That's the problem. And that is why I believe she's going to lose.
One of the funny things to me is, so Larry Elder, I guess to his credit, kind of gives some credit to Kamala Harris for going on Fox News. But a month ago, all of them were crying about Kamala Harris is hiding. She's not doing any interviews. She's not talking to the press. She must talk to the media. All she's doing is rallies, blah, blah, blah. And in the last several weeks, it's just been a media blitz with her where she is on everything, going on every podcast, going on every network, every interview. And, now they're complaining about the interviews that she's doing. So it's always damned if you do, damned if you don't with the MAGA right-wingers.
Okay, Luke, you're shaking your head there. Why?
Yeah. What is this bizarre thing that MAGA is trying to force onto Americans, this collective amnesia? We were in the middle of the pandemic 4 years ago. Yes, we're better off. And the very problems that people will cite to argue against the economic success of Biden-Harris are the numbers that are a direct outcome. Be just a little bit honest for a moment, Dave and Larry. are a direct outcome of pandemic conditions.
A little bit honest.
If you can't accept that, if you can't accept that Trump was making deals with Saudi Arabia and Russia to cut oil production, that caused the spike going into Biden-Harris. If you can't accept that Trump gave to Biden a crime spike, an economic collapse, a public health disaster, then you're not critically engaging with the last few years. So yes, we're better off because we got out of a crisis better than any other. Well, just listen, Dave. Just listen.
Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin's
came out of a crisis.
All right, Luke, let Dave respond to that.
Well, there's so much there. I mean, first off, it was the Democrats, once Biden took over, who made the pandemic situation much, much, much worse with mandates and forcing people out of work and forcing nurses out of work and everything else. But let's put that aside because that's years ago. How about we just deal with the last, say, 2 years, where they printed a relentless amount of money. And if you know anything about economics, if you ever did Economics 101 in college, if you print money, then it is going to cause inflation. Your dollar will be worth less. And that's why every single person watching this in the United States of America knows that when they walk into whatever grocery store they go to, whether it's to buy a dozen eggs or it's a pound of beef or bread, it is significantly higher. And that is not, and Kamala's answer for that,
we have the lowest inflationary cost of anybody in the developed world.
She wants more governmental control over the economy.
No, she wants price gouging to end.
Over your lives.
Quickly, just please answer this for me then. Why is it that our economy, just by the objective metrics we use to measure economic performance, came out of the pandemic under Biden-Harris way stronger than our wealthy economy counterparts? And then inflation, we got it down way faster. This was a global phenomenon because of a global crisis that Trump mismanaged, thus exacerbated. And you exploit the painful facts of that moment. You exploit the painful facts of that moment for political purposes. When even on your point about printing money, sure, absolutely the case that that'll cause inflation or contribute to it. So then what do you say about, as Trump was leaving office, him dumping, he added twice that of Biden to the debt, even if you exclude the pandemic, by the way, but especially including it. And you want to push it all into Biden-Harris. You want to exclude from Trump's record the pandemic era, but include it.
But Luke, here's the problem.
Biden-Harris. It's ridiculous.
Luke, here's the problem. You know, I'm not disputing some of what you said there. What I would dispute, though, is you're not really countering. Well, you're not really countering what Dave's central point is, which is most Americans, if not all Americans, if they think about what their weekly shop costs them today and compare it to the first few weeks, months of the Biden-Harris administration, it is indisputably a lot more expensive. And in the end, I think if they lose the election, if Kamala Harris doesn't win and Trump wins, I suspect, as always, it will be that economic reality, which is not to say the American economy is not performing well compared to many other countries. It is. You are the number one superpower in the world. But it doesn't change the fact that the cost of living for most Americans has gone through the roof in the last 3.5 years. It just has.
Totally, which is why it's a crying shame that people like Larry and people like Dave choose to mislead people about the cause of that, because they won't even engage with the point I just made about the global phenomenon.
Well, you don't want to put any blame onto your side. And that's fine.
Sure,
but
put some blame as long as we're
but your side have been in charge.
As considering the full context of it.
You can't keep blaming Trump for everything that happened.
Where's the blame?
So Luke Beasley is right with what he's saying here. And Dave Rubin and Larry Elder, of course, they're going to gloss over all of the faults of the Trump administration. Now, Donald Trump, you know, the pandemic was not his fault. In terms of the virus itself, that was beyond Donald Trump's control. But his reaction to that and how he handled things, as Luke Beasley is saying here, was an absolute disaster. Donald Trump, you know, he could have come out on day one and said, hey, I'm Donald Trump. I'm the manliest man that you've ever seen, and I wear a mask. And all of the MAGA supporters would all have fallen in line to be like Donald Trump, and they would have worn masks. But Donald Trump didn't do that because he's vain and he thought the mask would smudge his makeup or whatever. And so, you know, gave mixed messages on that. The same thing with the lockdowns and all of that. He could have been a strong leader on the pandemic and he would have gotten reelected, but he wasn't. And, you know, we lost a lot, not to relitigate all of that, but we lost a lot of lives that we didn't have to. And also, as Luke Beasley is pointing out here, much of what we're dealing with these high prices in the grocery stores is just the grocery stores and other companies gouging people. And Kamala Harris, she's backed off on it some, which I think is a mistake. But Kamala Harris came out with her, she didn't have a real concrete plan, but the idea of that they were going to go after price gouging. And that was polling really well, above 70%. And then you had all of the CNBC and Fox Business and all of these channels and all of these mainstream media people coming out and saying, oh, that's communism, that's socialism. You can't control what a corporation does, blah, blah, blah. And instead of the poll numbers going down on that, the poll numbers went up to over 80%. Because people look at their prices in the grocery store, and when you have Kamala Harris or another politician come out and say, we're going to do something about the way these companies are gouging you, taking advantage and gouging people, and that resonates with most Americans. And they don't care if it's called communist or socialist or whatever. Medicare was called communist and socialist when it was first proposed. And of course, Republicans call it communist and socialist now. Same thing with Social Security. But those are overwhelmingly popular policies. People don't care what you call that. They just know that it benefits them. And going after companies for price gouging would benefit consumers as well. So people don't care what it's called. And the Harris campaign has backed off on that some. I think they need to go back to that. I don't know if they will with a couple of weeks left. But Luke Beasley is exactly correct with what he's saying here. Dave Rubin and Larry Elder and Piers Morgan himself, who claims all the time that he's not a right-winger, but he is, they're all going to simp for Donald Trump and do this revisionist history where everything that's happening right now is the fault of Democrats and Joe Biden, and it has nothing to do with what happened a few years ago that caused all of these prices to go up. And like Luke Beasley talks about here, the deals that Trump made with Saudi Arabia to cut oil production to make oil prices go up. So completely disingenuous by Dave Rubin and Larry Elder and Piers Morgan on his show. But what do you think? Do you think Luke Beasley and the Democratic strategist Amisha Cross had to say here that they were correct with their assessment of what's going on right now in terms of the economy? Or do you agree with Dave Rubin and Larry Elder and Piers Morgan? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read your comments about Piers Morgan, Luke Beasley, Dave Rubin, any of these figures, or anything else that you like to comment about. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. It helps the channel to grow. I'm growing really quickly, but I want to keep growing. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so I can bring out more content like this. This is Chris on Culture. I will see you in the next video.